In this tutorial, we are going to talk about one of the famous topic called ecology. We are going to discuss the concept, the component, the roles, the energy flow, population, and conservation under this topic. So let's start with what is ecology. Ecology is the study of the relationship between organisms and their environment. For example, how we interact with plants. We give out carbon dioxide and we take in oxygen. While plants, we make use of the carbon dioxide in the process of photosynthesis and give out oxygen. We are making use of the oxygen, we are giving out carbon dioxide. They are making use of the carbon dioxide, they are giving out oxygen. So we have positive relationship with plants and how these living organisms interact with their environment. For example, the relationship between humans and water. We need water for our various activities, be it domestic or industrial. We also need water for our body to function normally. And at the end of the day, we are trying to maintain the hydrological cycle. That means the water cycle. So now let's talk about the basic ecological concepts or the basic ecological terms. The first one we have here on the slide is ecosystem. It consists of all the biotic and abiotic factors interacting with one another at a particular place. The biotic here means living, the abiotic means not living. So it is talking about how living organisms interact among themselves and how they interact with their environment. The study of this ecosystem is basically what we call ecology. The second one here is population. A population is a group of organisms of the same species living together in a particular habitat at a particular time. So in here we have to talk about of the same species. That means if we are talking about humans, it will just be human. If we are talking about cat, it will just be cat. In a particular habitat at a particular time. For example, the population census of Sierra Leone. In that case, they are counting only humans. They are not going there to ask you how many dogs you have, how many cats you have. It's only based on human. It has to be of the same species in a particular habitat of Sierra Leone. We are considering Sierra Leone, not other countries. At a particular time, that's why they have. That is the reason they have to mention the time in 2010 because the one in 2005 it differs with the one that we have in 2010. This is just an example. So it has to be of the same species in a particular habitat at a particular time. Next we have is community. A community is a group of populations of different species. In that case, you are not counting only one species, you are going to count many. It can be humans, it can be cats, it can be dogs, it can be rats, as the case may be, living together in a particular habitat at a particular time. And next we have is ecological niche, which talks about the functional role of an organism. So what are the specific role that these organisms, so the functional role of an organism in the community is what we call ecological niche. And we have the habitat. Habitat is talking about the natural home of an organism. For example, we know humans, our natural home is what? Land, terrestrial. Although we have those marine specialists, all the time they are in water, but that is not their natural habitat. Our natural habitat is land, and we call that land as terrestrial habitat. In the case of fish, their natural habitat is aquatic, means it is water. Even if you see them on land, because sometimes we used to catch them, we come with them on land, but that is not their natural habitat. And we have environment. Environment is the surrounding that affects an organism. For example, where I'm sitting, I have the air that is circulating within this room. There is a light, there is a chair. These are my environment that they are affecting me, either positively or negatively, whatever it could be. And we have decomposers. Decomposers, they break down the remain of dead organic matter. Example of decomposers, we have bacteria, we have fungi, etc. And we have population density, which talks about the number of individuals per unit area. For example, if we have 20 acre and we have 20 species in there, we can say we have one species per acre, because when you divide that 20 species by that 20 acre, you will have one species per acre. And lastly, we are going to discuss these two together: immigration and emigration. So this word immigration and emigration, they look very similar. Most students will find it difficult to understand them, but there is a trick for you to understand them. Just imagine immigration is talking about imports. Just imagine, don't take it for granted. And emigration is talking about exports. So if you are importing in, you are coming with it in. If you are exporting in, you are going with it outside. So immigration is the movement into population, means you are coming into another community. And emigration, which talks about export, means moving out of a population. So you are moving out of that community. So if you are moving out of that community, that process is being referred to as emigration. But if you are coming into another community, that process is being referred to as immigration. Now let's talk about the components of ecosystem. What are the components that involve in ecosystem? We have two components that are being involved in ecosystem. We have the biotic component. Bio means living. So the biotic component is talking about the living component of the environment. So in here we have the producers, those that produce their own food from inorganic substances. We have consumers, those that feed on the producers. Under the consumers, we have herbivores, they feed only on the producers, or we can say they feed only on plants. And we have carnivores. Carnivores, they feed only on animals, or we can say they feed only on another animals. And we have omnivores. The omnivores, they feed both on plants and animals. And we have decomposers. These are also organisms, but they help to break down the remain of dead organic matter. The second component we have is abiotic component, and under abiotic component, I have separated it. We have the aquatic abiotic component and we have terrestrial abiotic component. Because why sometimes they ask you name 5 or 3 abiotic components that affect aquatic organisms, or they can ask you to name 3 abiotic components that affect terrestrial organisms. That's why I separated it into two. But we have two components of ecosystem. We have the biotic component and we have the abiotic component. So let's talk about the biotic component that affects aquatic life. One, we have salinity that talks about the degree of saltiness of water. And we have oxygen, the one that they can use to respire. And we have wave, which talk about the up and down movement of the water. And turbidity, which talks about the cloudiness of the water. We also have temperature, we have pH, we have light. All of them affect aquatic life. Under the abiotic component that affects terrestrial life, we have temperature, we have pH, we have humidity. Humidity is the amount of water or water vapor in air. And we have light. In here, we also have rainfall. But briefly, let's talk about temperature, how it affects terrestrial life. We have some species that they depend on temperature for their reproduction. As in the case of fowl, they have to incubate their egg for some days before it is being hatched. In the case of tortoise, based on the temperature, it can determine the type of sex. That means the type of offspring that they will have, whether male or female. Also, temperature affects metabolic activities of some organisms, like the reptiles. Sometimes you can see in the morning hours, they will come and lie down where they can have direct access of the sun ray in order to increase their metabolic activity. We call that process basking. So the reptiles like the lizard, most often they bask. And we have pH. Some organisms can live in an environment where the pH is high. Some organisms they like to live in an environment where the pH is low. pH is talking about the acidity or alkalinity of a substance. And we have light. Plants they need light for photosynthesis. And even some plants, their flowering process, it depends on the amount of light that they receive per day. And we have rainfall, which is not here. The rainfall will determine the type of vegetation. And based on the type of vegetation, it will also determine the type of animals that will be in that area. Because let's say if this type of rainfall is just encouraging tall trees to be here. So organisms that can feed on tall trees or that like to live in tall trees, they will live there. So if the rainfall determines the type of vegetation that will be in that area or in a particular area, it will also determine the types of organisms that will be in that area. If the rainfall here, if it is scarce or if it is encouraging a particular set of vegetation, animals that feed on those type of vegetation will live there. If you cannot feed on those type of vegetation that is within that area, I guess there is no need for you to be there because you can find it very difficult to survive. Now on this slide, we are going to repeat what we have just learned in there. But in here now, we are going to use a diagram to explain all what we have explained before, but it is going to be basic. So I said the ecosystem, it is being divided into the biotic and the abiotic components. I said bio means living. So the biotic component is a living component of the ecosystem. The abiotic, A means not. So the abiotic component is talk about the non-living component of the ecosystem. And I said this biotic component, we have the producer, we have the consumers, those that feed on the producers, we have the decomposers. After the consumers have died, the decomposers will break them down, return the nutrient back to the soil, and the producers like plants will make use of it for their healthy growth and development. So under the consumers, we have three types of consumer mainly. We have the primary consumer. These are consumers that feed directly on the producer. And we have the secondary consumer. These consumers, they feed on the primary consumer. And we have the tertiary consumer. The tertiary consumers, they feed on the secondary consumers. In some cases, we have quaternary consumers that they feed on the tertiary consumers. Under the abiotic here, you can see we have series of examples here. Some of them affect aquatic, some of them affect terrestrial. Now let's talk about the roles of decomposers. Decomposers, as I said, these are organisms that break down dead organic matter and return the nutrient back to the soil. So if they are breaking down dead organic matter, they are helping to return the nutrient back to the soil. So in that case, they are helping to recycle nutrients. Also, they help to prevent waste accumulation, just like I said. And also, they release CO2 for photosynthesis. We know decomposers, they take in oxygen and give out carbon dioxide during photosynthesis. That carbon dioxide is used by plants in the process of photosynthesis to produce their own food. Also, they provide energy or raw materials to producers. This one, it looks similar with the first one that we discussed before. So example of decomposers we have, they are the fungi. Under fungi, we have example like mucor, rhizopus, etc. We also have bacteria as another example. We have some bacteria that are decomposers, not all of them. Some are parasitic, some are saprotrophic. And, and we have animals that are also decomposers. Example, we have earthworm, we have termite. Since I know that most students, they just know about fungi and bacteria as a decomposers, while sometimes they used to ask students to name macro decomposers. Macro means large, micro means small. So if they ask you about micro, which means small, micro decomposers, you name fungi, you name bacteria, they are very small. And if they ask you to name macro decomposers, macro means large. So in that case, you have to name earthworm, termites, etc. Now let's talk about decomposition and environmental effects. What are the environmental effects of decomposition? So let's take an example that we have a dog that died on a street. That death of that animal, it will be decomposed by bacteria, fungi, or insects as the case may be. During that process, gases like carbon dioxide, methane, ammonia, hydrogen sulfide will be released into the environment. And the release of these gases into the environment will cause what we call pollution. That is one negative effect of decomposition. And also, there will be an offensive odor due to the smell of that dead organism. And also, it will cause the spread of disease either through air or through contact. How can we control this? The main way we can control this from happening, one, we can bury it, or we do what we call incineration. That means we burn it down. Now let's talk about the energy flow, how energy moves in an ecosystem. So everything has to start with the sunlight. Plants will make use of that sunlight energy convert it into chemical energy through the process we call photosynthesis. But the energy flow has to start with light, because the sunlight, it is the main source of energy on earth. So now let's talk about energy flow, how energy moves in an ecosystem. So the energy enters the ecosystem via sunlight. So the main source of energy for the ecosystem is sunlight. This sunlight energy is being converted into chemical energy by plants through the process we call photosynthesis. When plants take this light energy, convert it into chemical energy, consumers will come and feed on these plants. They take that chemical energy and convert it into another chemical energy which they can use for their daily life activities. That chemical energy that the plant has created, what will happen? Consumers will feed on that plant in order to gain that chemical energy. At the end of the day, just like I explained, the primary consumers will feed on the producers, the secondary consumers feed on the primary consumers, and tertiary consumers dey feed on the secondary consumers. And when the tertiary consumers, when they die or when those organisms die, the composers will come, break them down, return the nutrients back to the soil. As one organism is consuming another, what will happen? There will be a loss of energy. About 90% of the energy will be lost. Only 10% of the energy is being transferred from one organism to another as one organism consume another. As we have here in this pyramid that talks about the trophic levels and energy transfer, at the base you can see it is broad. As you are getting up, it becomes narrow. So at the base you can see here we have 10,000 kilocalorie per meter square per year. As we move up where we have the blue, you have 1,000 kilocalorie per meter square per year. That tells you only 10% of this energy has transferred to another level. As we are going here where we have this orange color here, we have 100 kilocalorie per meter square per year. Also here, only 10% is being transferred to another level where we have the secondary consumers. As we are moving from the secondary consumers to tertiary consumers here, we have 10 kilocalorie per meter square per year. That tells you as well that only 10% of this energy is being transferred. It's a possible objective question. Now let's talk about food chain and food web. Many questions have been drawn from this area. What actually is a food chain? A food chain is a linear sequence of energy flow as one organism eats another. In food chain, one organism just eats one organism, not different organisms. And that one organism is being eaten by only one organism, not different organisms again. But when we talk about food web, which is an interconnected food chains, in here, one organism eats many organisms as the case may be. And that organism that is eating that many organisms can as well be eaten by many organisms. So in here, they are being interconnected. One organism is eating many, and that one organism is being eaten by many again. Now, if you are being given an organisms in order to draw a full chain, you start with the producer and you draw your arrow, map onto the primary consumers, map onto the primary consumer, the one that is eating the producer. The primary consumer will map onto the secondary consumer, the one that is eating the primary consumer, and the secondary consumer will map onto the tertiary consumer, the one that is eating the secondary consumer. That is how to draw the food chain. The most important thing, you have to know your producer, you have to know your primary consumer, you have to know your secondary consumer, and you have to know your tertiary consumer. There are lessons that is being learned from this food chain and food web. But before I tell you about that, you need to know food chain doesn't exist in nature. It only exists in theory. There is no case one organism can just eat one type of species. And there is no case that you are just eating that one species and you are being eaten by just one species. Let's say you are eating one species, but you can be eaten by many other species, not one. So in theory, food chain exists, but in practical, it is food web that exists. Now let's talk about the lessons that are being learned from this food chain or food web. We know from the food web or food chain, organisms are interdependent. That is what we learned. That you are feeding on another organism and you are being fed on by many organisms. Also, we learned that the energy decrease as we move up the food chain. Just like I told you, whenever an organism consumes another organism, only 10% of energy is being transferred. And also, if there is any disruption, it will affect the ecosystem. For example, if we destroy all of the plants, where can we have our food? Where can we have something that can convert carbon dioxide into oxygen so we can make use of it? Basically, when we destroy all the plants, animals that feed on plants, they will suffer. We will consume them until the time where they will become shortened or until the time where we will feed on all of them. And at the end of the day, after we have feed on all the other organisms, we will just remain with humans. And what will happen? On this slide here, we have trophic levels and biomass. So the trophic level is talking about the position of an organism in the food chain. We have the first trophic level that is being occupied by the producers, second trophic level that is being occupied by the primary consumers, the third trophic level that is being occupied by the secondary consumers. We have the fourth trophic level that is being occupied by the tertiary consumers, and we have the fifth trophic level, as the case may be, that is the apex, that is being occupied by predators. But you have to know decomposers are not part of food chain, are not part of food web, are not part of the trophic levels. That's why they are being taken out of this pyramid. It is outside of the pyramid. And if you can observe here, these are just examples of the trophic levels that we are talking about. Now let's talk about the interdependence of plants and animals. So how plants depend on animals and how these animals depend on plants. So plants provide oxygen, they give us food, and they also provide shelter for us. In the case of animal, we provide CO2 for the plant, which the plant can use for photosynthesis, and we have some animals like bee, those pollinators, those insects. They help in the process of pollination of the plant. And we have animals that also help in seed dispersers like humans. We help to disperse this seed. When we talk about disperser of seed, we are talking about the movement of seeds from one place to another. Now let's talk about primary and secondary production. How do we produce energy? So we have the primary energy production and we have the secondary energy production. In the primary energy production or the primary production, plants convert inorganic substances, substances that are not living. As we have in the case of photosynthesis, plant is making use of carbon dioxide that is not living, water that is not living, even though most people say water is life, but water is not living. And they are making use of sunlight to produce their own food. All of these three things that I have called, they are not living. So they use that one, convert it into an organic substance, substances that are living through the process of photosynthesis. And we have secondary consumer. What the secondary consumer will do, they will convert the organic substance into another organic substance. For them, they are not converting inorganic into organic, but they are converting that organic into another organic substance so they can make use of it. But one thing we need to know, most primary production goes to decomposers. Just observe all of these plants that we are seeing. Just observe the amount of animals, the amount of creatures that we have. Not even 10% of them are being eaten. Majority of them will die and decomposers will feed on them. On our slide here, we have population dynamics, how population changes. So we have factors that determine it. Although we have two here, I will explain another two that is not on this slide. We have death rate and birth rate. So if the birth rate is greater than the death rate, what will happen? There will be growth of population. But if the death rate is greater than the birth rate, there will be decline in population. The other one which I said I'm going to discuss, which is not on this slide, it is immigration and emigration. Emi is talking about coming in and emi is talking about going out. So if you are coming into a community, that one is called immigration. But if you are going out of a community, that one is called emigration. So if the immigration is greater than the emigration, there will be an increase in population. But if the emigration is greater than the immigration, there will be a decrease in population in that community. And on this slide here, I have something not actually related with population dynamics, but I just have overgrazing. The overgrazing also will affect the population of plants actually, but not animals. So this overgrazing, it will lead to vegetation loss, it will cause erosion, the washing away of the topmost soil by wind or water. It will also cause desertification, the process of forming a desert. On our slide here, we have ecological tools. In some cases, WAEC, they come with these ecological tools for you to identify them and give their uses. For some instruments, you will be asked to give precaution as well. For some of them, it is only to identify them and give their uses. So let's start with the sweep net. The sweep net, it will be like a net that will be attached on a wooden or a metal instrument that will move in this sweeping form like this. You use it to catch flying insects. And we have the potter. The potter, it is used to collect small insects. In here, it has something that will suck the insect in this potter. which you can use to collect them later. And we have the quadrant. The quadrant, we are going to discuss it, I guess, on the last slide or the second to last slide. In here, we have other ecological instruments. Number one here, we have hygrometer that is used to measure humidity. Humidity is the amount of water vapor in air. And we have wind turbine that uses wind in order to make electricity. This wind turbine, it differs with wind vane. You have to observe the two carefully to know the difference between the two. And next we have the wind socks and wind vanes. The wind socks and wind vanes, they determine wind direction, how the wind is moving. And we have barometer. This barometer, it measures air pressure. And we have anemometer. The anemometer, it measures the speed of wind, while the wind vanes, they determine the direction of wind. Anemometer determine the speed of wind. The anemometer and the wind vane, you suppose to place them in an open environment. You don't suppose to place them behind an object. It will affect their reading. That is the precaution that you have to take. And we have the rain gauge. This rain gauge, it measures the amount of rainfall. This rain gauge, you have to place it at a distance above the ground so that the water that is splashing on the ground or that is falling on the ground will not enter into the container. And also, you don't suppose to place them under a shade or under something. You place them in an open field and you have to place them at a distance so that the rain that is falling on the ground will not get back into the container that is collecting the water. Next we have is the compass. It can tell you whether in this direction you are moving, if it is towards the north, towards the south, towards the east, or towards the west, or even northwest, as the case may be. And also we have the weather balloons that help scientists to make measurements high up in the atmosphere. We have the weather satellites that monitor weather from high above the earth and send that information and images back to the earth. So it is this weather satellite that scientists will use in order to predict the weather condition. They can tell you this year we are going to have high amount of rain, or this year we are going to have low amount of rain. And lastly, we have the thermometer. The thermometer, it is used to measure temperature. Now let's discuss about the biological associations that exist among organisms. It's talking about how living organisms they live with one another. This biological association, broadly it is being termed as symbiosis. Symbiosis is a long-time relationship that exists among organisms of different species, not of the same species, but of different species. And most often, people misinterpret symbiosis to be mutualism. They are different things. Symbiosis is the umbrella of all of them. It is a long-time relationship that exists between organisms of different species. Let's start with the first one, mutualism. In mutualism, both organisms benefit. For example, the relationship between bees and flowers. The bee is going there to have nectar. At the end of the process, the bee is pollinating the flower. So both are benefiting. The flower is being pollinated while the bee is having the sweet nectar. And we have commensalism. In commensalism, one organism benefits and the other one is being unharmed. That means nothing is happening to the other one. It is not benefiting and it is not being harmed in that process. Example we have is the relationship between remora and shark. The remora will most often attach to the shark or it will be closer to it. So anytime the shark feed on its food, the remora will feed on the remain of what the shark has eaten. So the remora is benefiting, but it is not harming the shark by any means. Two things it is benefiting. One, from the remains of the food that is being eaten by the shark. Two, it is having protection because being closer to the shark, not many species will come closer to it in order to feed on you. If they dare do that, they will be food as well. Number three is parasitism. In parasitism, the parasite benefits and the host is being harmed. In parasitism, the parasite benefits and the host is being harmed. So in this process, it is only the parasite that is benefiting. The host is being harmed in the process. The tapeworms, they live in humans and they are benefiting two things. One, shelter. Two, food. The next example here, Miss Turtle. Miss Turtle, these are parasitic plants. They grow on another plant. They obtain their nutrients from that plant. Another example of parasitic plant is Dodder, Dodder, because WAEC they like to ask students to give example of parasitic plants because they know students know a lot of parasitic animals, but only few know about parasitic plants. Next we have is predation. In predation, the predator kills the prey. So the main aim of the predator is to kill and consume the prey. Example is the relationship that is existing between a lion and a deer. The aim of the lion, the main intention of the lion is to kill the deer and consume it. But in the case of parasitism, the aim of the parasite is not to kill the host because the parasite knows if it kills the host, it will not survive as well. So the main aim of the parasite is not to kill the host, but it's just to benefit from the host. And lastly, we have saprophytism. As we said, saprophytes under the tutorial about nutrition that they feed on dead organic matter. But their way of feeding is different from decomposers. What the saprophytes do, the food will be outside. They secrete their enzymes on it. The enzymes digest the food outside while they absorb the nutrients inside. Example of saprophyte, we have mushrooms, which is an example of a fungi.